So I decided to buy a nice new brake caliper. I was going to just replace the seals, but for the cost of the kit and the hassle of maybe would it work, would it not work, I'd have to make sure the piston was all cleaned down, which I'm sure I could have done, but it was a bit sort of hit and miss whether it would actually solve the problem. So I just thought, sod it, I'll just buy a new caliper because it was actually a really good price. Links below if you need to know. So, here she is. Now the bit that's interesting me, so this bit here is key. There should be a little copper washer, which I've got some, and that's going to provide my seal when I put the existing brake cable on. And here's your twin pot, nice and sealed obviously. So let's give it a go, and this is your little nipple, which I'm going to need obviously to bleed the brakes. Right, let's get this on the car.
Let's move on, 'cause it's time to move on.
So it's a 17 on the inner one just to stop the outer one from spinning, and it's a 13mm for the slider bolt on the outer one. Let's do the bottom one. 17mm on the inside, 13mm on the outside. So this here is called a banjo fitting, and if you look closely you can just about see there, that's one copper washer, and there'll be another one on the inside, and that's what I need to replace, otherwise I won't get a tight seal. So here's my new brake caliper. Let's just make sure it all looks good. They are handed left and right, so I made sure I got the right side. It's got a big L there for left and it looks pretty good. There's your nipple. This is a banjo fitting. So let's do it. So some people do crimp up the brake caliper cable to prevent oil coming out, obviously. I'm not a fan of doing that because you can actually damage it, and then it's a far bigger job to replace the whole brake caliper cable. So instead, just going to get a little cloth here, maybe a bucket. Some of it will drip out. Keep the reservoir cap closed, that'll help you, and it's just a matter of undoing this. I like to undo that bolt on the caliper rather than taking it off, because it doesn't move away from you then. Get the new one ready, get everything ready with the seals, the copper seals, the washers, and then get it back on again. Let's do it. I'm just going to put a cloth down here. This one looks to be 14 or 15. Let's try a 14. Yeah, it's a 14. So obviously once I get this banjo bolt undone, this whole caliper is good to come off. But let's make sure that's loose first. Just watch your brake sensor. You can undo that and move that out of the way. Okay. Alright, just going to put it back on temporarily. Now let's get this little 14mm banjo nut off. Didn't come off, didn't have a lot of pressure on that, and you can see already we're starting to lose that oil. So let's work quick. There we go. That's just coming out of the caliper existing. If you look closely on there, you'll see there's a little hole, and that's where the oil goes into the caliper. Got my finger on that. Move your pipe up high so it kind of works a bit against gravity. And that's your brake caliper off. Try and keep it that way around so you don't lose too much oil. And on the inside here, that's where the little copper washers are, which I need to replace. So here's my replacement ones. So there's the old one and there's the new one. Perfect. Let's get the caliper on so that it's not moving around. I'm going to put the top bolt in just to stop it from moving, just loosely by hand, so it doesn't go anywhere. Right, that's good. Right, banjo bolt. It's going to sit like that. Get the new washer, make sure that's on. And there should be a washer on the outside as well, which actually, if you look closely, is stuck on the nut. It's easy to miss these things. There we go. Right, there's the old one. They're designed to compress, which gives it a seal. A little bit like an olive in a central heating system. They're soft enough to provide that seal. There's my new one in place. Looks perfect. And then put one on the other side of this banjo bolt. Banjo fitting. So we got new copper washer, banjo fitting, new copper washer. Right, let's get that on. Now it was only just tightened up, so I'm going to check the torque setting and make sure I don't over tighten that. I'm just going to nip it up just now, going to go and check the torque setting, then I'll get my torque wrench out. Right, so looking at the specification, as you can see when I took that off, there was very little effort in undoing that banjo bolt. So I've got my handy little torque wrench. It's just a 1/4 inch size, beautiful little thing this. Nice, just gets into all the little neat little places that you struggle with a larger one. Because it's such a small amount of force, I like to hold it near to the fulcrum so that I don't overdo things. Just listen for the click. There, that's the click. I said don't overdo it because these are copper washers, they're designed to compress and give you that seal. Let's give it a little wipe. Should all be nice and snug in there now. Just remember, brake fluid is really corrosive, so don't get it on paint and stuff. Right, so right now what's happening is the brake fluid is going into my new cylinder. It's going to fill up this. We've also got to push the brakes out because the calipers were obviously retracted when I bought it. We're going to put these 2 bolts back on and we're going to get the little brake sensor back on. And that's it. The next thing to do, the most important thing to do, we've got to bleed the brakes to get the air out of it. But I've got a neat little trick. It's a little one-man brake bleeding thing that you can make with a little plastic bottle. Good. Alright, let's just drop the caliper forward. Keep the bottom nut in, because you can pivot on that. Let's undo the top one. And we can pop on some copper grease just to anti-seize. Not too much, because it's less is more really when using this stuff. Just slide that forward. There's enough room now for me just to apply a little thin bit of copper grease. Okay, now you can slide it back forward onto the fitting, pop in the top bolt. Make sure you hold the nut on the back side of the caliper. Just snug these up. That's it, done. So just check the sliders, make sure they're all good. We can do that at the moment because the brake shoes haven't been pushed in by the calipers. Right, so what I'm doing is I'm just loosening this lead nipple here. You can see that if I take it all the way out, there's no oil at the moment. But as gravity then lets the oil come down and fills the calipers, that will start to seep oil. So the reservoir is right at the top of the engine. I'm going to take the top off the reservoir to aid it and let the oil flow through. I'll pop in this little bleed nipple just loosely so it will still allow the air and importantly the oil to go all the way to the edge, and then we just need to bleed it. So just undo that slightly. You can see the oil is going down, it's filling up the caliper, and we'll just top that up afterwards, obviously with the right spec oil. So here we go, it's starting to drip out. Let's get my gloves on, and I'm just going to nip this up now, and then we're going to bleed it. So it's coming through the hole. Just going to tighten that loosely with my hand. Now it's only going to be dripping from the outer hole there. If I undo it a 1/4 turn, you can see it's starting to come out. So that's all it is. It doesn't need a lot. That's all that's holding that in there. Hydraulics is an incredible thing. It's a whole science, engineering, separate subject. You can't compress certain fluids, and brake fluid obviously is designed not to compress. You can compress things like air, but you can't compress oil. So when you push the force on the pedal and it goes through the tubes, you're getting the equal amount of effort at the other end. The distance can increase if the pipes are smaller, etc. Alright, so here's my little one-man bleed setup. Make sure you've got a pipe that's nice and snug on your nipple so there's no air that can get in. Make sure the hole is nice and snug through the bottle. Obviously make sure the bottle is empty and there's no water in it. Then drill a tiny little hole, that's your breather hole, just enough to allow the oil to go into the bottle. Then at the bottom here, that's going to then start to fill up with oil. As it goes up to say about this level, it will stop any more air going back up the pipe. And by doing that, it will just allow you to bleed the brakes all by yourself. Open up your bleed nipple. You can see the oil now starting to go down the tube. Just tighten up the nipple, pump the brake. So as you pump the brake, it will start to get firmer as the caliper then pushes against the brake pedals. The pistons have gone to their full extent of travel and are now pushing against the brake pads. You can see I've got no movement now, so that's good. Now what I'm going to do is just slacken off the bleed nipple and go pump the brakes a few more times to get rid of that air. So you can see here that the bottle, the end of the pipe importantly, is in the oil. That's going to stop air coming through, but we've got air bubbles up here. So I'm going to keep pressing the brake to get rid of those air bubbles that I can see through the clear part of the pipe. Okay, so let's just check everything. We've got no travel in the new caliper. The brake pads have the calipers pushed up against them. We've got no air trapped in the clear part of the tube at the top, just after the bleed nipple. The bottom of the tube is definitely inside the oil so that it can't suck up that little bit of air, because as you put your foot on the brake, they do release slightly. And that little release is what I didn't have because I had a sticky caliper. So there's no air that's been drawn back up that pipe. So now I can tighten the bleed nipple. Then with the right brake fluid, this is .4 for the Range Rover, just top it up. Just make sure you top up the reservoir so that there's back to the right level. So here's a great example. I've got the caliper off the car and I'm going to wind in this piston here. It's got no oil in it obviously, but you'll see the difference in how much tougher the one that was causing it to stick on the car is to the other one. So this is the one here where the rubber protection gasket has come off, and as I start to push this in now, you can see, this should go in easy. It really should, but I'm really having to pull on it and it's not shifting. It really isn't. However, you can see on this side, without any force at all, the piston's winding in nicely. You can see the difference there. That goes in nice, that doesn't. Oh, look at all that oil. So what's happening on the car, this piston was working as it should do, this one was sticking. And as the piston was coming out to push against the brake pad, to push against the disc, it should retract just a tiny bit. And that little retraction is enough to allow the wheel to turn, but that piston was just sticking on. So as I'm going along, I could feel it grabbing on the wheel. Anyway, we've got a nice new one on there now.
Let's move on, 'cause it's time to move